Oh. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Carla from MindPlore with Carla and Friends. And we are here to talk together on empathy. That is the word for the week. And I haven't been extremely empathetic today, so I hope to gain a lot from this conversation today. Because empathy is understanding where someone else is and being able to put your feet in those shoes and be loving and kind. And I kind of screwed that up a little. We all do at times. So, having said that, Jean, will you take over so I can get this shared out as much as I possibly can, because we are still not on Facebook.
Okay. Well, empathy is a really great concept for us to discuss. And I found two more quotes that I want to share that help us. One is from a writer, Daniel Pink. He says, empathy is about standing in someone else's shoes, feeling with his or her heart, seeing with his or her eyes. Not only is empathy hard to outsource and automate, but it makes the world a better place. And then I want to share one from a very popular writer, Harper Lee. She wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it. So empathy is really the ability to understand somebody else from their perspective. And that makes it something to aspire to. What do you think of that, Newt?
Yeah, first of all, of course, I agree. The first thought maybe for me is that in order to have empathy with another, we also need to have empathy with ourselves, because it's like a match. If I am about to be in the other person's shoes, I need to know how I use my own shoes first. So I think it's this, we think very often on empathy as being in another person's shoes. But after my opinion, and from my own experiences, I see that the lack of empathy is very often a lack of self-love for our own self first. We are not able to really sense another person because we don't really open up and we haven't received this self-love first. So that is my initial comment on that.
It's a good point. Understanding your own being and where you are, which I think is difficult if you tend to be selfish instead of self-love. Cameron?
Yes, thank you. Empathy can also be better understood when we look at other words that are similar, sympathy, for example. And what I came across recently was an understanding, which is sympathy is when you feel for someone who is either in pain or in trouble, whereas empathy is when you feel with someone. So it's the difference between the for and the with. And yes, I fully agree with Knut and Jean. I certainly like the quotes you shared, but it's a very tall order to be walking around in someone else's shoes and skin and whatever. So for me, empathy changes our sense of reality quite significantly. For example, we have this paradigm which is global and multinational and global village and one world. We keep hearing this, and I think this has become a very fashionable, and of course, when we talk of technology, this one world concept has truly gripped us. Whereas empathy tells us that no, everyone lives in his or her own world. Everyone lives in his or her own world. I live in mine, Jean in hers, Knut is in his, and Carla in hers. So there are 4 worlds here, and God knows how many are listening in. But there are 7 or 8 billion worlds out there. And to be able to just acknowledge this fact, which is, shift from a one worldview to a multi worldview, that I feel is leadership as well. And it allows us to realize that my truths and the way I see the world and my sense of reality is unique to me. It cannot be transposed onto others. And I feel that will heal the world much better when we recognize that my worldview is only my worldview. What about the rest? And for that, listening becomes key. And for that, patience is key as well. So multi-world, 8 billion worlds is where empathy takes us from this very smug reality.
I think the two concepts of one world and multi-world can come together. They can kind of mesh together. Yeah. But it's the idea of one world is at a high level. That's, if you're flying a plane, it's 50,000 feet and you look down and, it's green and you might see some blue, but you don't see a whole lot of detail. But as you get down to sea level or to the individual level, you see more than enough detail. Yeah. But I think the exercise is to recognize that everybody has their own level of detail, and we need to hear it, because we can't, unless we're up in that airplane, we can't get that 50,000 foot view. Yeah. I know when I speak in strategy, when I'm doing business consulting, we go, well, what's your message at the 50,000 foot, and then what's your message at the division foot? And then, now we're going to go down to sea level and it's product level. What's your message? And it's the same with how we live in the world. So I can't even fathom what it's like to be on the other side of the world because I've never been there. Yeah. However, I can listen to you and you can tell me what's going on. And I could go, oh, that might be rough, or that's really beautiful, because I kind of pull that in and try to understand from your perspective. So one of the things that I want to bring up, this is also something I use in my consulting, when you know how when you get different product groups or different groups of people and they don't see to each other, they have their own goals and they're going to go after them no matter what, because it's dog eat dog. I say, I'm going to pull out my portable perception machine. Are you guys ready for that? And they wonder, because they think maybe she's got a box somewhere and it's hidden. And I just hold up my hand. And I say, now, what do you see? You actually see the palm of my hand and I see the back of my hand. But guess what? It's the same hand. And that helps us look at things from a different perspective. And if I have several people, then I go, and you guys only get to see the side of my hand. It's not the best part, So seeing from somebody else's perception, feeling from somebody else's perception, that's a gift. That's a gift that we should all be giving out freely.
This is also a skill then, we talk a lot now about deep listening. And I agree with you, Kamala, now that we live in a time where empathy has changed its perspective from the individual to the collective and to the global and even universal. So I call it diversity and unity, that the true empathy is to understand and listen into what I call the soul of all time on the global level. To understand what is going on, what is the shared topic, what are the shared issues we as humanity need to go into and understand. And the other is to be, as you said, genuine, to look from what I call the superposition, and then we go into the details. We look at the individuals, and we look behind what the individual says. So empathy is for me to understand and to catch, to read the energy behind the words that we are sharing. And then I do understand, okay, here is a hidden agenda, and that is a part of the skill of understanding what empathy is. Otherwise, it can be, I feel so with you, and it's only on an emotional level. But for me, empathy is to understand, even in a structured way, what is going on in the other's mind and heart.
What did you call it? The soul what?
The soul of the time.
I like that.
The soul of?
The time. This time. The
Soul
soul of the
Oh,
time.
soul of the time. Okay.
Yeah, soul of the
Wonderful.
time.
Yes.
Because I think, again, that we have changed the perspective from the individual to the collective, and from the collective to the global and universal. So we, so to say, empathy is to change and to shift between this individual understanding, the diversity, and to understand, yeah, but what is this bond that connects us on this highest spiritual, holistic level?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you say the soul of the time, are you also coming to an understanding that we are all part of one soul that floats through through this planet?
Yes, I mean, you know, that we know already now that everything is interconnected. The whole cosmos, the whole universe, more and more realize that, both from a scientific perspective, from a spiritual perspective. We have known that for thousands of years, that everything is interconnected. So I agree with you, yes. It is really to understand that this, you know, that we are interconnected, but so far we have been more concentrated on the national, the cultural, the religious differences. Now we are called to find what is this, the essence. So when I talk about the soul of the time, is also to understand what is the quintessence of our calling as humanity in this shift.
Interesting.
What do you think about that, Jean or Cameron?
I'll go after Jean.
Thanks.
No, Cameron, I'd like you to speak now.
All right, Carla, I will not argue with you ever. And so I find it very interesting that the word empathy doesn't get discussed in geopolitics, but it does get discussed at a citizenship level. So no matter which country you go to, I find that people who are not in government and are doing their stuff are very open to the idea of diversity and unity, like Knut mentioned. But when you go higher up, somehow the distortions occur and silos are get created because national self-interest comes in the way. And then we get the spin doctoring and the messaging and God knows what else. And then we are locked in this ambiguous chain of events where social media and mass media becomes questionable because we don't know what the truth is from what isn't. So that is a very interesting. So it's a small minority that divides, and it's the majority on the planet that wants to see the world heal. And I have a feeling that this is historic. I mean, go back as many years as you wish, and you will find that there have been wars waged under a certain rationale or guise. And common people tend to follow their leaders. And as a result, a lot of people die. That's part of, I suppose, nature. But at a level that we are, I think 80 to 90% of the world population is loving what you said and what we are discussing. It is just not allowed for some odd reason. There are so many noises out there which cancel the benefit of empathy, connection, humanity, one world, interconnectedness, that kind of stuff.
There's a lot of competition for attention. And I think that might be one of the underlying issues of why so many people, as you say, the civilians, the masses might believe something, but there's so much time for competition that the people we think of as leaders don't often understand or know what's coming. And we see it played out in American politics all the time. If I can't even fathom what the rest of the world thinks of us when they look at our news, because it's so divisive. It's so, this is extremely simplistic, but what they say is it's all red or it's all blue. There's no in between. I actually wrote a blog post years ago that everything is black and white, and it's tiresome because there's one black, there's one white, but there's thousands of shades of gray. And in reality, everything is a shade of gray. It's got a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And the majority of us are in that gray zone.
All red or all blue. There's no in between.
Somebody's playing
actually
something.
wrote a blog post years ago
Someone needs
that
to
everything is
turn
black
off
and
their
white,
YouTube.
and it's tiresome because there's one black, there's one white, but there's thousands of shades.
So there you go.
Excuse me for one moment. Knut, you may not have Facebook running at the same time as YouTube. Or if you have it running, you need to mute yourself. It's okay. I know what you're doing, but you need to mute yourself because it becomes an echo.
So we're all in that shades of gray part, and we don't always hear what other people are saying because we're so tied to trying to figure out where we stand. And the idea that not everybody thinks like me seems to be foreign. Right now, when I'm talking to people, it feels like the responses I get back are, it's my way or the highway. And my response when I run across somebody like that is, I'm really interested in how you think this way. Can you give me a little bit of background? And literally, purposefully listening to what they're saying and trying to connect. And then at the end, I'll say, it's really interesting because one of the great things about the world is there are 7 billion people in this world. And that means there are 7 billion opinions. And our job is to learn how to work together so that each opinion can stand. And that's when they kind of go, oh, but it's an old saw. If you put 10 people in a room, you get 10 opinions. And that's the beauty. Everybody has their way of looking at things. It goes back to that perspective. So the soul of the true world is a great concept, because I think that there is a way that we can balance our ego mind, our super mind, and your ego mind and your super mind, because we can start to find those areas that we have in common. There's a reason they tell us not to talk about politics or religion typically, because people become intransigent about it, but everything else they'll talk about.
But isn't then empathy, is a part of the new global leadership, as I see it. Because this is not for granted, that we do understand this diversity in unity and diversity, as you say, because we have so many different opinions. At the same time, I would say, no, we don't have 7 billion opinions, because they are anchored in cultural, religious, political, economic culture. And that is why we often have this lack of empathy between nations and on a global level, because there are cultural differences that no one of us we want to give away, because we feel it threatens our identity, our existence in itself. So it is this, both to understand that we are dependent on each other in this shift, because we know we can extend, we are the first generation in history that really can extend our own generation. So we have to listen in to what is the solution. So empathy is not just to understand the other and to be in the other person's shoes, it's also to come up with solutions that favors both the individual and on the whole. And one of the challenges is that the individual perspectives and opinions are the very hindrances for this empathy to unfold. That's why I also say, what is happening now is there is a new kind of leadership growing and emerging all over the world, because we have a leadership now on a world level that they are, it has emerged from the old paradigm, all separation, all desolation, all lack of this kind of empathy we talk about here. So I think this collective empathy and the individual empathy has to come together now. So we gather, as I say, kindred spirits all over the world with this perspective, because it's not easy to understand what is the quintessence of this time. We talk about it, and it's a concept, and I believe in it, but we need to listen into it from different perspectives and backgrounds in order to come up with a consensus that then favors all of humanity and even the planet.
Yes, that would be that would be a growth in an order of magnitude that we need to do. And you said listen, and I, as you were talking, I was thinking that means, in a sense, we have to allow imperialism to finally die off. The need to build empires versus having independent countries. And it's going to take some really dynamic leadership to be able to do that, because we still have some old straggling, we still have some straggling old world beliefs. But the one thing I can say that social media has done well for us is it's given everybody a voice. Anybody who wants a voice on the world stage can step out. They may not be heard immediately because you have to kind of grow your following, but anybody can step out and be heard. And I think as we see social media mature and what I call the 10-year-old boy games that we see playing, where everybody just jumps on with the negativity and tries to tear you apart. Once that goes away and we start seeing the real power of social media, I think that will push us forward, because the leaders will be able to hear from the masses. But it's going to take some really creative leadership to listen to us and allow us to have a voice so that they can have empathy with us out here. I mean, we've got millennia of time where they've been saying, I'm the leader, do it my way, versus what do you guys think? How do we find the solution here? And that has to happen not only just in government, that has to happen in corporate leadership as well, the way that we work. There's a reason a lot of people go off to do their own thing, because they want to shine, and they want to allow themselves to work in an area or in a industry where they can give back. They can be recognized as somebody important. We all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. And if there's one thing that I cherish from the movie Avatar, it's when they look to each other and go, I see you. I hear you. To a very single person, even to a baby, to be seen and heard is important. And we minimize that as a society. We minimize that. We still, I believe, the majority of parents still have a little bit of a children are supposed to be seen and not heard kind of mentality. And granted, there are times when children need to be reined in, but if we were told from day one, you're to be seen and not heard, or as that grows through the years, I don't want to hear you, you need to shut up. That leaves us stepping into our adulthood going, I can't speak. I can't allow myself to shine through. And that's, when I believe when I hear Marianne Williamson talking about that bushel basket being put over us and over our light, and she says, who are you not to shine? That's what we have to do, is take off those blinders that have been put on since day one, and allow ourselves to speak and show the wisdom that we bring to the world. And we want people to hear that and to listen to that. We also want them to understand, and that's where empathy comes in from their perspective. But empathy has to come in from our perspective, because as I'm talking to somebody and they've never heard this before, they're going to be somewhat uncomfortable when I come out and say something. So I need to understand from their perspective. And I can use an example. When I was in Japan, I was taken on a business trip to Japan, and I hadn't really done the study of how to do business in Japan, because I had a perspective. I was very young and brash, but my perspective was, when this group came to us, we bent over backwards to make it comfortable for them. We changed everything we did so that they could do their work and be comfortable. I expect the same from them. Now, that was a bit naive, because I didn't understand the Japanese culture at the time. And I found out that I kind of broke all the norms. Here I am, a young lady, and I'm talking to somebody who's, in the grand scheme of things, 3 or 4 levels above me in the corporate world. And I'm looking him straight in the eye, just like an American woman would. And I'm saying exactly what I need, and I'm speaking directly. And this gentleman, I kind of, now when I think back on it, he was really uncomfortable. I had no empathy at this point, and he's mopping his head because he's sweating. And I did not understand how many norms I was breaking. That said, I was successful in getting what I wanted. Wasn't the right diplomatic way to do it. I now understand. So when I deal with a Japanese executive, I'm completely different. But that time, nobody had said, you need to understand this. So I just went in as Jean and dealt with them. But had I had some empathy and understanding, I would have approached it completely differently. So that's where I think getting a better understanding of how to use not only empathy, but when to use empathy and when to use directness. We can put all our global leaders in a room, and I will venture to tell you that we won't get an agreement even on the easiest things. But if you put them in a room and you say, there'll be no trading on the stock market, there'll be no financial deals made, there'll be no food brought in, and oh, by the way, we're not going to have bathroom breaks until 2 hours, because what we want is some agreement on these 3 things. You know how long it will take to get agreement? I'm pretty sure it'd be like that, because we've taken away all of the distractions. But that's my opinion that would happen. I mean, literally, when I was raising teenagers, I put them in a room, sat them on a couch, and, basically did that. No snacks, nothing until I get done talking to you and we have an agreement on what you're going to do. Because that's how I figured it would work. And, it was uncomfortable for those guys, but I was the parent and I was going to make them listen. So there's a little bit of, I'm going to say parenting, at that global level, we need a little bit of parenting, and we need a little bit of nurturing. We need a little bit of empathy, and we need a little bit of directness. It's kind of a mix, if you will. Does that ring true?
Makes a lot of sense. And while I was listening to the two of you, I came up with an idea which I think can progress us further in this very complex direction, which is Dr. Peter Senge, guru of learning organizations, his contribution to the corporate sector, the voluntary sector, government, has been commendable. And I find that he came up with a very simple model. And he says that the three legs of a stool, the first leg being aspirationally, all people are aligned. Everyone wants a good life. Now, what it looks like is slightly different, but it's free of controversy. But aspirationally. So that is the first leg of a stool. And I feel that when we use empathy, it'll be wonderful to understand what is their perspective on a good life going forward. And everyone has a different view, some spiritual, some material, some a blend of both. Second, he says that the most critical process in society, in organizations, in government, wherever, is conversations, the kind that Carla is hosting, and Jean is so ably supporting her in this. Conversations is the key process that transports ideas from one to the other. And the listening part happens in that environment. We're not talking of a process that gives you a credit card or a manufactured car at the end of the day. We're talking of a process which gives you synergized, richer sense of what is happening between people. So the second leg is conversations. And the third leg, he says, is dealing with complexity, the interdependence, Kunut, that you were alluding to earlier. And that dealing with complexity, I mean, conflict is very much a part of human existence. And conflict could be managed or it could be ignored. Conflict is differences of opinion. When managed, you get innovation, you get beautiful outcomes. And when not, you get a lot of dead bodies and ultimate disasters. And we've seen that. So that was Dr. Senge's model. And I think it relies heavily on empathy. Because to know the aspiration of the other requires empathy. To have conversations requires respect for the other's opinion, regardless of how different it may be from us. And the third one, of course, the complexity is allowing and acknowledging that, yes, this is a long road. It could take centuries for us to weave through. I mean, if you look at Swiss history, I mean, I was shocked that 700 years ago, there were cantons and people were at each other's throat and they were rebels, of a very similar kind to the ones we see today. And look at Switzerland after 700 years. How has it evolved? And how beautiful it has become in so many ways. And the most powerful person in Switzerland today is the citizen. And to me, that idea itself is so beautiful. And no one can ever name the president of Switzerland or the prime minister because it's institutionalized. It's a well-designed governance structure and people know their place and they're all adjusted. There's a culture which is very clear. So I'm not saying it's utopia, but it's certainly relative to some countries. It's a very mature, aligned example that can inspire many of us. Yeah. And the second part of this conversation, and I feel this is an exercise, and if you allow me, Knut and Jean and Carla, I would like to do this exercise with you as well. And it only takes you to write 3 things at the end of it, okay? Just 3 words or 3 short phrases. Think of a person for whom you have the deepest admiration. And this question could be asked anywhere in the world with any person who is 18 and above. Think of a person, dead or alive. I didn't add that before. Dead or alive, for whom you have the deepest admiration. Without naming the individual and without revealing the gender, list 3 reasons that led you to make this choice. Only the reasons. What is it about the individual? We don't want to know the gender or the name or the origin. We just want to know the reasons that you have for choosing. So, I mean, if you can shoot those out, I will write them.
Mm.
Compassion, love, and joy.
Yeah. Knut?
Holistic, universal, loving.
Beautiful. And Jean?
Catalyst, great listener, sharing love.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing is, I'm very, very happy that you participated in this. Now, look at the hope in this very short exercise. I asked for reasons, not qualities. No one mentioned wealth. No one mentioned appearance, the looks. No one mentioned the power. No one mentioned conquests. No one mentioned any of the temporal stuff over which people are dying every day, fighting like cats and dogs. No one. And I've tried this exercise in the Middle East. I've tried it in the UK. I've tried it in Islamabad, in different parts, villages, and in the elite circles. And I always invariably get qualities. And the beauty of this exercise is that when you take away, as Jean mentioned, take away the name and the gender, we are all deep down aligned as you are. So who can argue with loving and compassion and universal and holistic? And this is what everyone on this planet wants and admires, by the way. It's the noise that cancels everything out. It's the noise that suppresses this spiritual yearning. And if you had mentioned the name, then that's where the learning ends. And, I don't like the guy, or I have a view of such and such person. So I have discovered that we are very conditioned into, because I don't know who it is that you thought of. No, I'm very connected with you as a result of what you said. And you shared qualities, not anything material, not looks, not tribe, not complexion, not wealth, not power. All those things that are causing us to destroy ourselves, shoot ourselves in the foot.
But come on, this is really interesting. I love this, it's a dialogue. And if you then gather not people into the same room, but people with those qualities on a global universal level, isn't that the solution then? So from my perspective, when we talk about that global renaissance and revival, it is exactly to that. Find the right people with these qualities, put them in the same room, come up with a consensus. And now they have dialogue with people from China, Australia, Japan, several places in the world. And what we all, agree on is this universal consciousness. That is the only thing. We talk about business from the universal consciousness. We talk about the spiritual, come together from that perspective. And I think what you or Jenny mentioned, these distractions. I mean, that is exactly what I mean with listening to the soul all the time. Because when we remove all the distractions, and whatever we like it or not, the distractions are then grounded and founded in exactly what we are not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
So then, because those topics and those issues are no, let's talk about it because it can create conflict. But at the bottom, it's exactly the conflicts that we don't solve because we don't talk about them. That's why we need a new kind of leadership. Because if we don't talk about this, what are the real source for the faults, for why we are taking decisions that is not good, either for ourselves or for the planet or for the humanity and for the future, not least, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is then empathy? Empathy is also to ask those questions that are so taboo, that they are so radical, so provoking, that we really come together. But then we need to have the same kind of heart coming together. These qualities, When we have these qualities with different backgrounds, politics, viewpoints, all that kind of stuff, when we come together with that approach, then we will come up with also concrete solutions.
Absolutely. So true. So true.
There's an art to all of this, isn't there? The art to suss out what's at the heart of all the people you want to bring together. And, you know, how do you get us out of our head and into our heart? You know, the Toastmasters group I belong to, we focus on being authentic and speaking from the heart, even though we're all business people coming together. And it makes it a different atmosphere. You know, it's more one of support and help and healing versus competition. You know, I've been to a lot of networking groups where you feel like you're competing with the person down the table from you, you know, but we try to keep that level of competition at bay, because we all start off with the belief that there's plenty of work out there for everybody. Yes. You know, especially we have a lot of coaches, you know, life coaches, and each one is different. You know, I actually play with the idea of doing a podcast of talking to every coach, because they're so unique in how they approach their businesses. But if we could bring that level of sensitivity to global conversations, so that we move out of here, which is logic. It's logic, it's intellect, it's important, but into our heart, so we can actually listen to each other and really hear. It's one of the things that I discovered when I was writing for an anthology. I ran across a study that Siemens Corporation did, and they're a multinational corporation, so that they did their study within their own employee base, but they came up with a conclusion that people spent nearly 17 hours a week trying to undo miscommunication.
Wow.
You know, my reaction to reading that was, think of how much more productive we could be if we simply listened to each other and figured out what is being asked of us before we run off to go do it. And that's a function of listening, because we know that people tend to listen to the first half of a request or the first half of a statement, and then they start in their head to figure out, what is it I can say? How can I prove that I know what I'm doing? How do I impress this person? And so you don't hear the last part. You know, I use Steve Harvey and Family Feud as an example. You know, when they ask the question, they say, you know, according to 100 people, the best place in the house to, and you hit that buzzer, you have a 99% chance that you're going to be wrong, because you have no idea, you know, that the critical piece of information, you know, the best place in the house to what, you know. So if it's, you know, to cook, of course, the answer is kitchen. But if it's to sleep, it could be the bedroom, or it could be the living room, because some people can only sleep in their easy chair. You know, there's lots of different answers. But if you don't hear the critical information, you're going to have a miscommunication. And it's going to be really, really hard to do the work that they're asking you of. So I stated that real leaders listen. Real leaders try to suss out what's important and address those things, so that there isn't the miscommunication. And I see miscommunication on a global level. I see it on a personal level. You know, I think that the act of listening is something that we've never really focused on. Unless you get to some sort of therapy, nobody's ever going to say, you know, you don't really listen too well, you know. And in truth, it's a great skill that we have to practice, because it's a muscle memory skill. And I'm still practicing, because when I'm hearing people, I can feel myself going into the, what am I going to say next? And I have to stop, take a breath and say, no, listen, you know, put this aside, pay attention. And that's what I think our leadership needs to do, to hear us. And they need to be open to hearing, no matter what level you are in the society. I would love my president to come knock on the door and say, okay, Gene, I heard you had some opinions. Well, hello, Mr. Biden. Yes, I do. But I know that that's a little difficult because he's one man. However, I can certainly write an editorial if I want, and he can possibly read it. We can all do that, but we have to listen to each other.
Well, that's why, and I shouldn't be bringing this up now, but that's what the Insan Party that Rayhan has created is doing, to create a way to empower people to do what needs to be done. Like in Pakistan and around the world, English is the global language. And because of that, there's a Ministry of English Literacy. There's a Ministry for Sports. There's a Ministry for Jobs and all different things. And it is only to create that ability or that platform for everyone to become a part of the political scene. Someone said, well, he shouldn't be calling it political, but that's wrong, because it really is political in the sense that it's bringing the governments together and making it global and not just Pakistan, the United States, Portugal, or whatever.
Now, the truth is, when you put 2 or 3 people in a room, it's political.
Right. The moment you have 2 people in the room, it becomes political. And I said that. I asked him about it because I said, is it really political or is it a movement? And he said, it's political, and if you want to leave and I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. People are freaking out by the word political, but just 2 people speaking becomes a political thing.
Yeah.
And it happens immediately.
Yes. And I would like to sort of add my bit on this. I feel that some words have been hijacked. And they've been hijacked from their depth and meaning to something very crass and crude. I mean, for example, making love. I mean, love is a huge word and has several dimensions, universal as well as connection and empathy. And I think love is life, really. And if you bring it down to an act, I think that is travesty. There could be another word for it, but we do this. And politics, we have done the same. Politics has become a dirty word, and a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. I was a member of Toastmasters Club in Vancouver, 2 of them. And of course, they mentioned that no politics, religious talk, and no language has to be very clean, unless you're in the comedy club, which is quite something else. So I recall that politics itself is nothing but how to gain power, how to use power, share power, and sustain power. Now, there are decent ways of doing it, ethical ways of doing it, and there are unethical ways of doing it. It's so much easier to use fear to gain power, either with a gun or by bribing people. I mean, that's another way of gaining power. How about using, because politics is about power, and good leaders are the ones who make others more powerful. They don't keep the power to themselves, and they use it to good ends. Every human being, if he or she is alive, has power because of life. And that power needs to be understood and used with others. It needs to be discovered from within. And it also needs to be used over young children who need to be guided as well. Just like Jean mentioned, parenting. I mean, at different stages in the child's evolution, we need to behave with the child in a certain way in order for him or her to grow up to being a very balanced and a very empowered and a very responsible individual. So politics itself, I feel, is every society, an organogram in an organization is a political map, distribution of power. But then there is the formal distribution and there is the informal distribution. I mean, I've found that chairmen don't have as much power as their executive assistants because they're the ones who decide who the chairman shall meet and will not meet. So in a way, if we ignore power, we are going to be in a blackout. There will be no electricity, there will be no lights. So yes, politics is the key, but we need to see the nobler side of politics and not Machiavellian politics that we have become so accustomed to.
You are at the core now, what is, really my passion here. Because you talked about, Jenny, the heart and the brain, okay? We have been living in a world of the brain of the mind, you know that. So there is a shift from the brain to the heart, okay? But what I miss is how do we put this sort of new heart, the work we are talking about here of empathy, into a structure? Because without a structure, then we don't have what I call the ultimate optimal environment for this new consciousness to unfold. And that is what is missing. It's not just about the heart. It is how we express our hearts into a system. And I try now to learn as much as I can of both the new economy and of new kinds of organizations. And you talked about system and complexity, systems design. That is exactly what we are talking about as the solution. Because when we come together as kindred spirits, we say, okay, these are our universal values. We put them into a smart contract and we invite people who want to share this, because in the smart contract, everything is already, it's a closed circuit. And remember, the challenge we have now, that is that most political parties and leaders, they are extremely afraid of the citizen's voice. Because when we have 7 billion voices all over the world into the same smart contract, what should these power leaders do? They will lose their privileges, Yeah. So this is so radical. So we really need to understand how to approach it in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
I have two reactions. One, Cameron, what you're talking about is jargon. When we start, whether it's a group from work or it's a group from your community organizations, you start to have shorthand words. So we put too much into it. So politics means X, because that's part of the culture. I used to rail when I wrote about technology. Multimedia was an exciting word when it first came out, because it was the first time we're talking about bringing video and audio and data together. But quickly, within a year, multimedia became such a grand word that nobody knew what it meant anymore. And so that was an example that I always bring up. But I'm in communication, and every once in a while I'll say something and I'll see somebody blank out and I go, oh, I'm sorry, I used a word that was shorthand. And let me explain what I meant. And that, I think that's an important sensitivity that anybody in communications needs to understand. So a lot of times when I'm talking to young writers, I say, write to somebody who's in the 5th grade level, because they don't know the jargon. And you need to explain it. The other thing is new. I think what's missing in the equation from moving from head to heart and how do you get it out, we can't count culture, and culture comes up from civilians. Culture comes up from the masses. I lived through the birth to the maturity of rap, and I can tell you, for the early rap music, I loved. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Well, today's rap, I don't understand. I don't understand it at all. They use language I have no clue on, but that came up from the younger generation. And now it's permeated every, aspect of life in America. And that's okay. But when we look at the culture, the beliefs, the values that you brought up, and how you get it out in there, out into the culture, that's going to be a key point. And if we, to go back to our subject of empathy, if we could build empathy into our cultural norms, we could see a great I don't know, a great giant leap in how we continue our growth as human beings. Because I think empathy is one of those skills, because I think one of you called it a skill, which it is. It's one of those skills that we didn't value when we were, trying to gain, gain our power over other people. When that was the currency of our time, and I'm thinking about, the 30s and the 40s when we had the Al Capones trying to take over worlds, and the power that these people had because they had machine guns and they could basically kill anybody that they wanted. They took over whole cities, and it took a long time for cities to take back that level of control. And we go through this process, whether it's wars or it's civil unrest or things, we go through this and then we mature. But if we had empathy built into our cultures all around the world, I think we could skip that little, hiccup that we have to go through periodically.
Yeah, all about that. Yeah, like there are computers which have, they used to have the saying, Intel inside.
Yes.
I would like to see a world where it says empathy inside. So that it becomes part of the curriculum and a part of your DNA. And I feel that the world that's going to manifest as a result would be so different from what we are accustomed to so far. Jack Welch used to say two words which he felt were the most critical in running a global organization: voice and dignity. And that's what people need, to have a voice. And as you said, Jean, I want to be seen, I want to be heard. Now, if we can create that culture where no one feels left out or not valued and sees himself or herself as part of a huge endeavor and enterprise, there will be inspiration, motivation, and so much else. And of course, there will be arguments, and of course, there will be debates, but it will be on a healthy level. And I have a feeling that empathy has to be induced in our DNAs. I hope these vaccines are having a chip for empathy.
Here's the power, Kamran. The four of us can walk out of this discussion today and change how we react to people and encourage empathy. And there's going to be not just the four of us, but by the end of the day, there'll be 16, 20, 32, however many people we talk to, we can influence. That's the power each of us has. And I want to remind all the listeners, how we act in the world affects other people. Yeah. And whether we say, I'm going to stand for empathy, or we just act out that we have empathy, that's how we're going to change the culture. Right. It's going to hurt sometimes because people don't like change. But I think if we do little changes, it happens faster.
Yeah. I think, at a term we use is a world without boundaries. When we talk about a world without boundaries, and we start to believe in it, because this is also part of the value and belief system. So I call it, to introduce a model of understanding. We do understand that everything is interconnected. So this starts for me with education. It starts with communication. It starts with dialogue, as we are doing now. And then we disseminate it and we work on the practical level as well. Because for me, this is a dialogue between the mind and the heart, to understand, to listen, and then to understand what are the concrete practical consequences. If we start with the world without boundaries, what does it mean on that global level, but also on the individual level? So it's all intertwined. And as you said, Jenny, of course, I know that very well, because I really met many times I run into discussions, and I do understand that the other doesn't understand what I talk about, because the jargon is also very new for many people. What we talk about is very, very unusual to discuss for most people. So we need a new model of understanding.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I don't think you realize that we have been talking an hour and brought up some very important points about empathy. And I feel very honored to be joined by this wonderful panel of Cameron, Jean, and Knut, who were so talkative on the matter and so intelligent that I did not need to say much. We will be back on Tuesday for another MindPlore. And we're not sure what the topic is, so we'll figure it out and let you know. But I believe we will be still broadcasting on YouTube directly because I haven't gotten access to my Facebook Live yet. And I want to keep the show going. So, guys, don't go anywhere, but can we wave goodbye? I need your opinion on something, and we'll see you next week with a new panel and a new topic.